Ginger and I are married 43 years, miracle of God that we stand here today. She's going to be sharing, she's the shy one, but she's going to be sharing quite a bit here today, and what was on her mind when she decided that she had to turn me into the FBI, and it was the right thing to do. But boy, I was caught up in the world. You know, I mentioned to you I was the only child to go to college, and I went and got a bachelor's and master's at Ohio State, full scholarship, PhD at Cornell University in biochemistry. I graduated at the time when biotech was exploding, when Genentech had just started, and the job offers right out of college, even at 25 years of age, were amazing job offers then. And even in 1983 at age 25, by the time I was 32, I was divisional president of the 56th largest company on the Fortune 500, 70 billion in annual revenue, 30,000 employees, and I was number 4 ranked executive. I was caught. I said, "Look out, Bon Jovi, here I come." I was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber. Had a Falcon 50 for 8 years at the company. Had bought the CEO's home. I can remember the CEO was wanting to sell his home, and he gave me a $500,000 startup bonus. I was with the company for 3 weeks. Gave me a $500,000 startup bonus to be a down payment on this mansion, 13,000 square foot house, 8-car garage. It was the original house of John Daniels, who founded Archer Daniels Midland 115 years earlier. Gorbachev had visited that house. Mother Teresa had been in that house, and there was even some record that Abe Lincoln was in that house. It was built in 1846. It was a mansion. It was a Bill Gates kind of house. And to have that at age 32, boy, I thought, boy, if there's a heaven, this is it, is what I was thinking during that part of my life. The 8-car garage I quickly filled with 8 cars, had a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedes. Ginger's driving a Jeep Cherokee, a 10-year-old Jeep Cherokee, and I had $2 million cars in the garage. I said, "Ginger, I'll buy you whatever car you want." She goes, "You know what? I kind of like my Jeep Cherokee." 10 years old, and I'm driving a $250,000 Ferrari, thinking I was Magnum PI. Driving around with a snap black off red car with the black snap off top, and I was really caught up. I mean, I was caught up in the world. There's no doubt about it. And she was getting obsessed with Jesus at that time, and she was going to Bible studies and just saying, "Boy, Mark, you got to come to church. You got to hear this. You got to hear the gospel." And I was going with her, and one ear out the other, and she was pouring about Jesus into our three children. We tried to have, for 8 years, have our own children, and the doctor said we ought to consider adopting. Ginger and I met, and I mentioned yesterday, 7th and 8th grade, went to our high school proms together. We were the homecoming king and queen in our school, and I was class president. She was class treasurer of her class. She was 1 year behind me, and the doctor said we ought to consider adopting, and it was really like a 4 or 5 year waiting list to get a baby. So we adopted a 5-year-old and 7-year-old, and she was pregnant 6 weeks later. So basically in 10 months, we had a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, and a newborn in 6 months time. And I thank God that my kids all take after Ginger. And so much more. They're all older now than I was when this even happened. I was 32 when all this was going on. Our youngest is 36. But the bottom line is I was caught up in the world.
And ADM knew that. It didn't take them very long to figure out what Mark's weakness was, and it was materialistic things, it was money, it was just, and they fed right into it. Just like a kid in a candy store, they knew exactly what they had to do to get Mark kind of caught up in what they were going to do. They were priming him basically, like, "Hey, we'll give you this great bonus. We're going to get all these wonderful, a jet, a company car, travel all over the world," because they were leading up to ask him that most important question that was coming down the road. We all know no one gives you a $500,000 bonus in the first 3 weeks. For me, red lights are going off, like, this is not right. Something's wrong here. He's like, "Oh man, this is the best thing ever." So it was really a difficult time for us. I know he was so excited about the job, but I was like putting on the brakes very heavily.
Yeah, I can remember even when Ginger met the first person from ADM. It was actually the COO of the company who was mentoring me to take his place. The plan was for me to go from divisional president that I was and corporate vice president of the company to become the next president of the company. So I was being groomed by a 69-year-old. Our CEO was 75 years old. He was grooming his son. So the son was being groomed to be the CEO, and I was being groomed to be the COO, the president of the company. And Ginger met the COO the first month in the company when we were shopping for our 4-year-old, who's now almost 37. So that's how long ago this was. We were buying clothes for him. We're on a ground level store. And I remember the COO pulled up and was buying stuff for his grandkids. And he pulled up in a yellow Ferrari, 69-year-old, yellow Ferrari. And I introduced him to Ginger, and I remember him saying, "I'm going to make your husband a very rich man." And I'm just so excited. I mean, I tell you, I just thought, boy, this has been the best decision I ever made. I'm only 1 month with a company. He's talking about how rich he's going to make me, and he talked about how he had 14 cars like that was parked out there. And I remember him leaving that clothes store, and Ginger said, "I think we made the worst decision we ever made in our life." I said, "Ginger, did you hear what he said? He's going to make me a very rich man." And she said, "Mark, the hair is standing on the back of my neck." She said he never talked about the employees, 30,000 employees. Decatur, Illinois is 80,000 people in town, and 30,000 work for ADM. He never talked about the community. He never talked about what they did for the community. All he talked about was his wealth. And she said, "I think we made the worst mistake we ever made in our life." And I said, "Ginger, I think I made the best decision I ever made in my life." And that's how different tracks we were on during that part.
Because he didn't ask, "How do you like it here? How are your kids adjusting? Where are your kids going to school?" He didn't ask anything that normal people would really ask you if you just started with a company. But you could see the sparkle in Mark's eyes when he's like, "I'm going to make you a rich man." And I'm looking at like, we're already rich. We're already so blessed. From the standpoint where I was standing, and the thought for him was like, oh, even more. So it was a very difficult and kind of conflicting time for both of us.
Yeah, we were definitely on different tracks. And I remember a couple of years with the company, as I mentioned yesterday, the vice chairman who I reported to, who was the son of the CEO, called me back in his office, and he gave me a $100,000 check, 25,000 shares of stock in warrants, not options. That was about $1 million between the two. And it was at a time that we didn't get normal. I was used to I was making $2 or $3 million a year for 8 years in bonuses starting in 1989. But this was at a time that wasn't a normal bonus time. And I thought it was kind of strange. He came back about an hour later, and I could tell he gave the money first, and then, that was the hook, and said, "Mark, we're going to start bringing you into some of the things we do at the company. Yeah, you're so young at 32, and with the CEO and president, 69 and 75, we're going to have you start learning how we do business here at ADM." And I said, "Well, I've been here 2 years. I know how to do business at ADM. I'm leading the division, and I know what to do." He said, No, we've not shared some things with you. We have an international cartel with our competitors. It's been going on for about 12 years. And we earn an extra $1 billion a year. That was a $70 billion company, $4 billion in profit, $1 billion from the price fixing of several ingredients that go into your beverages and foods. It'd be difficult to buy a Campbell soup or a Kellogg cereal or a beverage that doesn't have something from ADM in it, one of the largest food additive companies in the world. They and Cargill would be the largest food additive companies in the world. So when you look at that label on the side of citric acid and lactic acid and high fructose corn syrup and wheat flour and soy flour and baby formulas, those are the things that we made, those are ingredients that we make at ADM. They're even larger today, even a larger company today. So they brought me into this, and I said, "Boy, is that legal?" And they said, "No, it's not legal, Mark, but everybody does it." As I mentioned yesterday, politicians put these antitrust laws on the books, and this is how you have to do it when you're in the commodity business. This is how business is. And I said, boy, I don't know. And he said, "Mark, I'm telling you, everybody does it." And I'm thinking, well, here's a CEO that's 75 years old and been CEO for 35 years. He sure knows a lot more than me about this, and I'm only 7 years from getting my PhD at Cornell University, and I'm kind of young in the business world. So I really started thinking this is the way business is done. And I was so obsessed with the income and the compensation and the 7-figure bonuses that I just wasn't willing to walk away. So I said, "Yeah, I'll learn it. If this is what it's going to take, become the next COO of the 56th largest company in America, I'm all in." And I didn't tell Ginger for a few months, but she could tell something, with her knowing me since the 8th grade, she could tell something was on my mind. And a few months into it, and she said, Mark, something's changed on you. And you're on the phone all these hours in the evening. And I said, well, I'd be on the phone in the evening because 8 o'clock at night in Decatur, Illinois is 8 o'clock in the morning in Japan and Singapore and where some of our competitors are. And I named them like Ajinomoto and Kiwako. And she said, well, Mark, why would you be talking to your competition? That's your competition. I said, well, they're training me to take over a price-fixing scheme, this huge international cartel, and we earn an extra $1 billion a year, and I'm going to make even more millions by doing this. And they're training me to take over this, to be over a big international cartel. And she said, boy, Mark, is that legal? And I said, it's not legal, but everybody does it. And she said, Mark, that's outright fraud. You're stealing from every consumer in the world. And she said, matter of fact, my grandma's $200 a week in Social Security, and you're stealing from my grandma, my parents who work in factories. Her dad worked at Ford, her mom worked at Procter & Gamble, and she grew up on a beef cattle farm, Ginger did. She said, you're stealing from everybody. She said, I can't believe you've done this. I said, Ginger, I have to do it. We're going to make millions. We're going to be worth $300, $400, $500 million in 5-10 years from now. And she said, Mark, she said, this is terrible. She said, Satan's got a hold of you. And I said, no, Ginger, if there's a heaven, this is it. We're in it right now. We got a jet. We got a mansion. We got 8 cars in the garage. This is heaven, Ginger. And she said, I can tell you, Mark, this is not heaven. And she said, I'm going to pray about it right now because I don't know what to do, but I'm going to pray for God what we need to do in this situation. And she went back in her study and prayed about it for a couple hours.
He makes it sound like it's so dramatic, and it was really not that dramatic. I had just been really knowing, I had seen this burden, and if you've ever seen anybody that's carrying a burden on their shoulders, you know what that looks like. Mark loved his job. The legal part of ADM he loved, absolutely loved. He was making it grow. He was doing wonderful. But then this illegal part was just, he knew it was wrong, but he loved the money and the things so much he couldn't let go. So that's what I had seen on his shoulders. And then to find out what it actually was that was going on, I was blown away. Like I said, I was a mom just raising 3 small kids, and international cartels were not in my wheelhouse. You know, we lived in a town of 1,200 people, you know, raising corn and soybeans. It was not anything I understood, but I knew enough that it was wrong. And so I did go back to pray for it because I knew in my heart, how do I face my parents, my grandparents, my friends, my neighbors, knowing as we sit across the table, hey, ADM just stole a bunch of money from you when you went to the grocery store, and they've been doing it for 12 years. So for 12 years, people might have to make a choice between, well, do I buy this for my kids, or I might have to buy something else because the cost of everything, you were paying the price. And that just really hit me right in the heart. I just thought, I grew up, like I said, Mark said, on a beef cattle farm. My parents both worked in factories. My grandmother lived with us. We didn't have any extra cash. There was nothing extra. But my parents really ingrained in us that if you want something, you have to work for it. You steal nothing. And so this, to me, they can call it international cartel. It was stealing. They were just stealing from people. And so that's when I went up to pray, and I just, prayed for God to just give me some wisdom. I didn't know what to do. What could we do? I knew Mark loved this life. He didn't want to leave this life, but I knew it was the wrong place for us, and it wasn't where I wanted to be. And during that time, I just felt this overwhelming presence of God just saying, it must stop. And that's all I heard. It must stop. I just felt it. And I thought, okay, but I don't know how to stop this. I have not a clue what to do. And so I just came down and said, Mark, you have to tell the FBI. And again, we were in our early 30s, pretty naive. We'd never had a speeding ticket, never any interaction with the law. And I'm like, we just need to tell them because, they'll just bug the phones and they'll insert some people and they'll get all the information. We won't have to do anything. And little did I know after we confronted them and talked to them how wrong we were about it. But I knew in my heart it was the right thing. I knew that God had wanted this to stop, and I happened to be the vessel he was going to use at that moment. And it could have turned out completely different. People ask me that all the time. You know, what would have happened if I came downstairs and said, Mark, you know, we're going to call the FBI. We need to turn yourself in. You need to tell them what's going on. He could have easily said, well, you can call them if you want. You don't have any information. You don't have any evidence. They'll just lock you up as if you are a lunatic because they're not going to want this exposed. So he could have gone a different way. He could have chosen the money, the greed, and stayed where it was and pushed me to the side. But inside, had still then a good heart, and he knew that was wrong. He knew what they were doing was wrong. And so we went and we talked to the gentleman, the FBI agent, and he assured us it would only be 6 weeks. Just a 6-week thing. Mark would just have to wear a wire for 6 weeks. That turned into over 3 years.
How many of you ever went and told the FBI you're stealing $1 billion a year? I can tell you it's an interesting reaction. I mean, that phone was ringing off the hook. It reached Janet Reno, who was Attorney General at the time. William Sessions, who's Director of the FBI, became the largest price-fixing case in U.S. history, started by Ginger, a stay-at-home mom raising 3 young children. And I can remember sitting in front of the FBI, and I said, I'll do it myself. I'll go in there. And she said, nope, you're not going by yourself. I'm going in with you. We're going to make sure you tell everything and tell it all. And I said, no, we don't need you, Ginger. I'll just go in there and I'll tell them. And so she's with me. We're 4 hours with the FBI. And I remember the FBI, and I'm trying to do a Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing. You know, I'm trying to weasel my way out and everything. You know, I got a PhD from Cornell, and I've seen a lot. And I thought I'll weasel myself out of this. And so the FBI said, well, what's going on here now? Why are we meeting? I said, you got all these drug dealers on the street. Just think about all those drug dealers in Decatur and all those bank robbers in Decatur. You got so many more important things to do than talk to me. And I said, this is really not important. He said, well, tell me what's going on. And I said, yeah, but what about all these drug dealers in Decatur, Illinois, and bank robbers? And he said, well, tell me, what's happening here? And Ginger said, well, it's a price-fixing case. Price-fixing case. And he said, how much money's involved? And I said, it's not much money involved. Not near as important of all the other cases you'd have going on in Decatur. I said, it's so many more important things you to do. And Ginger said, it's $1 billion. He said, $1 million? Ginger said, no, $1 billion. And he said, how long's this been going on? And I tried to do my Bill Clinton thing again. You got so many big things to do in Decatur, Illinois, and drug dealers on the street. I saw them even coming in on the corners of the street. And Ginger said it's been going on for 12 years. $1 billion theft for 12 years. So he never did get anything out of me, but he got everything out of Ginger that I told her 2 hours early. He should have just interviewed Ginger and left me out of it. So after 4 hours, Ginger, you know, we're young and naive, as Ginger said, never been involved with law enforcement before. And Ginger said, acted like my lawyer. We didn't have a lawyer with us or anything. And Ginger said, well, we can go home now, right? You can go tap phones and do all the things you do to catch these bad guys. And he said, you know what? The only one that confessed is your husband. We have to arrest your husband today, or he has to wear a wire starting tomorrow to be the kingpin. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the difference between a whistleblower and an informant right there. When you read in the newspaper a whistleblower and an informant, they're two very different things. A whistleblower is someone who sacrifices everything to do the right thing. And that was Ginger. She sacrificed everything. The home we lived in, the income we were making, she sacrificed everything. An informant is someone who's sitting in front of the FBI and has a choice to start wearing a wire or be arrested. And that was me. So I was an FBI informant, but you know, the FBI still announced today, I did 6 events for the FBI, including Quantico FBI Academy, and they announced me as the highest level executive ever to turn whistleblower in U.S. history. 30 years later, still the highest level executive to become a whistleblower in U.S. history, but in reality, Ginger's the whistleblower. And I was just an informant that was caught in my tracks. Ginger told all the truth right when I was with them. And that was the different roles that we had. She's the whistleblower, and I'm an informant. So I started wearing a wire every day. They'd shave my chest at 6 in the morning. They'd say, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you. This is an international cartel involving $1 billion theft, 11 companies each earning $1 billion. $11 billion a year. ADM alone was $1 billion. $11 billion a year for 12 years in a row. And they said, this is serious stuff, involves billionaires, and someone could make a plane go down and it'd make it look like an accident, but your life is going to be in danger. Ginger heard that. Matter of fact, they used to wire me at my home, and our 4-year-old son, who's now 37, he heard that, and he made a comment to Ginger one day, and he said, "Is Dad come home today, or do they kill him today?" And at that point, Ginger never let the FBI wire me in my home again. They had to start wiring me around in different hotels in Champaign, Illinois, and outside of Decatur, Illinois. She never let them wire me in my home again. They wired me up at 6 every morning, check all the equipment. I had a tape recorder attached to my back with an athletic band, had a special tape recorder in a briefcase, and a third tape recorder in a notebook. 3 different tape recorders ongoing all day long, 8, 9 hours a day, in case one of them would stop working. And there was this green lamp that had the video camera in it. It looked like it came from a yard sale. This green lamp had the video camera in it. And the FBI would be in the next room when I tell them where the meeting was taking place, the cartel meeting, and they would zoom in when that green lamp, whoever was talking. They had a remote control camera in that green lamp. And you know that green lamp with the same 11 guys with the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore, 11 guys, $1,000 a night hotel. That green lamp was right there with us, 5 feet from us, in a corner of a room, in a little conference room, and they were zooming in. 2 weeks later, that same green lamp, same 11 guys, was at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong. Same green lamp, looked like it came from a yard sale. 3 weeks after that, that same green lamp, excuse me. Sorry about that. But thank you. That same green lamp was at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago. That green lamp was at 2 or 3 meetings a month, the same 11 guys for 3 years. And I look back and I say, thank God there wasn't a woman criminal among us. Because if we had a woman criminal among us, a woman would have said, you know what, that green lamp is following us around the world. But when you got 11 greedy guys that are making millions each on the biggest price-fixing case in U.S. history, they don't see what's 5 feet from them. Until there was a 7-week trial in Chicago. Over 30 people went to federal prison on the biggest price-fixing case in history, and the prosecutors and the FBI agents bring in that green lamp to show the jury where that evidence was collected, and they all slapped their head. Then they remembered the green lamp that they saw 2 or 3 times a month for 3 years. But what I learned in that journey, being an FBI informant, is greed blinds you. It blinds you, and you don't see what's 5 feet from you. Because that green lamp was with them 2 or 3 times a month for 3 years. Most stress I ever went through my life, lost 60 pounds. People at work thought I had cancer. It was often on tape where someone says, Mark, you need to see a doctor. You don't look good. I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep at night, up all night long, because I kept thinking, if they catch me, they're going to kill me.
And he was so broken during that time. Like I said, he was continually conflicted, but yet emotionally and physically he was falling apart. And I remember one night I hear the leaf blower at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's thundering and lightning and the wind is blowing. And I'm like, what in the world is he doing? Like, this is not normal. So I go out to him, and he's there still in a suit like he's dressed in right now, trying to blow the driveway off, but the wind and the leaves are just going around. And I'm like, standing on the porch like, Mark, you need to, come on, come back inside. You need to put the blower away. And he just keeps doing it. I'm like, Mark, you need God in your life. You have got to get God in your life to help you get through this. And he looked at me so directly, and he said, who needs God? I'm going to be the COO of ADM. And I looked at him, I said, whoa, you've got this wrong. You are the informant against them. And he goes, no, it was in Fortune magazine. I am going to be the next COO of ADM. And I said, hon, that's before they know you're the informant. When they find out that you are the informant, you are not going to work there, bud. And he is like, oh, yeah. I said, no, you're not. The board is made up of family and friends. And they're not going to be happy that you've sent their family and friends to prison. So you have got to come to some realization that you're not going back there. And up until that time, for that whole 3 years, Mark really believed that he was going to go back to ADM. And I had begged the FBI for couple of years to get Mark some help, because I could see he was falling apart. He was really torn between the two roles, loving ADM during the day, tearing it apart every night. And they were really afraid for Mark to see somebody because they felt like if the psychiatrist heard what Mark was saying, they would advise him not to do it any longer, not to work undercover. And then they were afraid also that, hey, if ADM ever found out that Mark had gone to see a psychiatrist, they would find out what was going on, which then would expose the case, and who knows, he may not have been standing here. So it was a really, I always say each time is difficult, and there were difficult circumstances, but I'm so thankful I had God in my life to try to help manage Mark, I guess it would be at that stage. But I just wanted him to find the peace and some safety in God, and he just wasn't having it.
Yeah, and the FBI was so appreciative of me wearing a wire. They went to the U.S. attorney in Chicago, got me a full immunity agreement, never to do one day in federal prison. All I had to do, it said, as long as you don't break any laws we don't know about, you'll never do one day in prison. All I had to do is just stay out of my own way. Well, I'm not very good about staying out of my own way, especially back during that time. And I started thinking, they told me it was the last 6 months of the case, last 6 months. And I thought, well, who's going to hire someone who wore a wire against their own company for 3 years? It'd be easier to get a job as a felon than someone wore a wire against their own company. And I'm still at that point only like 37, 38 years old after wearing a wire for 3 years. And I thought, well, who's going to hire me? My career's over. I graduated at 25 from Cornell with my PhD, and my career's over. And I started thinking about, well, how am I going to keep this mansion that I have and our kids in the private schools and the horse riding stables that we had on our property with the inside arena? I was so addicted to that and obsessed to that. I thought, well, how am I going to continue to afford that? And I looked at, well, most of 90% of my income was in stock options, and I started going through my stock options in detail, and I had about $9 million that if I could cash them that day, they would owe me about $9 million. But the problem was it was about 14 months away, and the FBI said we only had about 6 months left. So that means 8 months before I can exercise these stock options, that I'm going to walk away from $9 million, which is going to need to be my severance. It's going to need to be, I deserve this, I felt, and I earned this, and it's the bonuses that I earned during that time. And so what I decided to do, being the smartest guy in the room, I thought at the time, I went in and started writing 5 checks to myself over about 3 weeks for $9 million. The COO, who I was going to replace, had to sign anything over $250,000, and he's stealing $1 billion a year for 12 years in a row, so he wasn't going to turn me in on it. And he just said, "You're getting a little greedy." He'd sign them, but he said, "You're getting a little greedy, aren't you?" And so he said, "You need to slow down." And I had to explain that on the tape one time to the FBI too, what all that meant. Which then after they learned about the $9 million, they knew what it meant. So anyway, I wrote these 5 checks. I didn't tell Ginger about it. She already turned me in on price fixing. I sure wasn't going to give her another opportunity to turn me in. So I sure said the last person I'm going to tell is Ginger. So I had the $9 million. I thought, man, they owe me this. If it ever goes to trial, I got stock option agreement signed by our CEO that they owe me this $9 million. I'm the most protected guy in America. Any jury would be sympathetic that I cashed this in myself early when they knew what the company owed me in these stock options. The very day that ADM learned, when the case went public, 70 agents raided the headquarters in Decatur, Illinois, took all the computers and all the paperwork to support what they had on tape for 3 years, all the financial documents. That very day, because they were signing those checks, they were okay with it when I was with them and even still promoting me. But once they learned that I was their enemy, they said, let's put Mark in flames the same way he put us on flames on price fixing. I had full immunity on the price fixing. So the ADM called the FBI and said, "Mark Whitacre's no white knight informant. He stole $9 million from us the same time he's working with you guys, the FBI." And the FBI come to our house and met in our living room, and boy, thank God they were there, because when Ginger heard about that $9 million, boy, if the FBI wasn't there, murder was an option, even though divorce wasn't. And if there was ever a time I thank God the FBI was sitting there with me, it was that day. Because Ginger, I had to explain to her about 5 checks I wrote for $9 million. So the FBI saying, Mark, what's going on here? And I showed him the stock options. I said, Mark, we understand, but you can't exercise stock options 9 months early. That's breaking SEC laws. There's federal laws against that. And you've broke the law, Mark. Who knows 8 months from now what that stock would have been worth to even know your exercise date? You've lost your immunity agreement, Mark, with this $9 million. You've lost it. And Ginger, was in tears to know that I wore a wire 3 years and the immunity agreement was down the drain. And the FBI agent saw Ginger and he said, Ginger, we should have never taken Mark to wear a wire for 3 years. We could tell all along he was falling apart. And we should have taken your advice and got him the help he needed. They actually have a rule today, the FBI, not to allow anybody to wear a wire longer than a year, because they saw what happens when someone wears one for 3. So they were sympathetic to Ginger. And they said, Ginger, we're going to lose the immunity agreement, but we're going to get Mark because he wasn't thinking clearly, because of us forcing him to wear a wire for 3 years, and we're going to get the best plea agreement we can get for him. And they went to that U.S. attorney in Chicago and said, Mark Whitacre helped solve a crime that was $11 billion a year for 12 years. And sure, he stole $9 million at a time that he's blowing driveways off at 3 in the morning during thunderstorms. But we should have never had him wear a wire for 3 years. And the FBI agent, the prosecutors agreed, said we should have never had someone untrained wear a wire for 3 years. We're going to give him a 6-month Martha Stewart sentence in a federal camp with no fence. And because the ADM already announced to the media that he stole $9 million, so we have to punish him somewhere, but we'll give him 6 months in a federal prison. White-collar camp, no fence. I go to our lawyer, and our lawyer sat in front of us and said, Ginger and Mark, 6 months, a deal of a lifetime, 6 months in a white-collar camp. And I said, Ginger, I don't know if I can do 6 months. And Ginger said, Mark, I beg you to sign this. And as I said yesterday, I looked at Ginger. I said, Ginger, I've had to wear a wire for 3 years for 10 hours a day because of you. I said, it's your fault that I'm in this mess in the first place. And I ripped up that 6-month plea agreement and threw it in her face and fired the lawyer on the spot and hired a group of lawyers the next day and fought through the courts for 3 years to get 8.5 years instead. And I had 6 months. All I had to do was sign it. I was my own worst enemy every step of the way.
With him tearing up the agreement right in my face was horrible. There's nothing worse for somebody to blame you. And I have walked through that. I didn't wear the wire, but I had to live every day praying all day long that he came home because, they had told us he could be killed. And then Mark didn't think he could take the 6 months, and he attempted suicide. So then that's, here I've been blamed that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to him. It's his fault. He doesn't want the 6-month deal. Now he has 8.5 years, and he attempted suicide. And by God's grace, we had a gardener at that time that came every day faithfully at 8 o'clock. Not 7:59, not 8:01, 8 o'clock.
8 years in a row.
Yes, and he felt something in his heart that morning that he was supposed to come early, and he did. And when he opened up the garage, he found Mark and saved Mark's life. God saved him by putting this on this gardener's heart. But it was probably one of the darkest points in our marriage and in this whole struggle because I was sad that he felt that we weren't enough to keep him alive, that we wouldn't stick by him. But then I was angry. It was like, whoa, buddy, your company did this, not me, and you're going to leave me with 3 kids and your parents and all this to explain, and you've taken the easy way out. You're wanting to leave, and also he didn't know Jesus, so I'm worrying about where his soul is going. And so it was a really dark, dark time in our marriage because he wanted to give up. He didn't want to fight for his life or for his family, but God had a whole different plan. He brought the gardener there early. He got Mark having mentors and people pouring into his life, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that we went through that refining fire I wouldn't wish it on anyone to go through that, to have to find your husband in that situation and then try to explain to your children what has happened. It was a very deep and dark time.
Yeah, when I attempted suicide, I was hospitalized a month, treated for post-traumatic stress disorder and some of the things that happen when you wear a wire, 3 years for the FBI. And the judge gave me 7 months to get back on my feet before I had to go serve the 8.5 years in prison. And I kept thinking I'll find a way to kill myself and make it work. This time I was so upset with the groundskeeper who showed up at 6:30 in the morning after showing up at 8 for 8 years in a row, showed up an hour and a half early. If he showed up at 8, I would have already been passed. I'm a PhD biochemist. I calculated how much carbon monoxide I needed, and how many square feet it was. I knew how to calculate all that. So if he would have showed up on time, I would have been passed. As a matter of fact, I was passed out, and the doctor said it was 20 minutes from actually passing away based on the carbon monoxide levels that I had. So I was really upset with him. I kept thinking about how I can kill myself over these next 7 months before I go to prison for 8.5 years. And what happened was, a guy read about me in the newspaper. His name was Ian Howe, CFO of a pharmaceutical company. He read about me, and he showed up to my house, and I'll never forget, he said, and this was a month after I attempted suicide, he said, "Mark, prison's going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in your life with the journey you're ready to start." It's the craziest thing I ever heard. I'm about ready to go to prison for 8 years. And I said, what do you mean about that, Ian? He said, "Mark, I'm going to introduce God." And I said, "I've been going to church with my parents. My parents are Christians, and they forced me to go to church as a youngster. I've been going to church with my wife and my kids. I already go to church." He said, "No, Mark, I'm talking about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm not talking about going to church." And I said, "Well, tell me more about that." I mean, I was hopeless and helpless, and I was looking for answers. And he started spending 6-7 hours a week with me, discipling me, and introduced me to God, and introduced me to Jesus. Ian Howes did. He was part of a group called CFO of a pharmaceutical company, but also part of a group called CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection. And he planted a seed that was very important. But I still had 8 years of college where I had professors at Ohio State and Cornell said, "If you believe in God, you can't be a scientist. If you believe in God, you can't be in my class." And I'm thinking, some of these guys at Cornell and Ivy League University, one of them, Dr. Wilson, won a Nobel Prize in physics. And I thought, who am I going to believe, them or my parents who didn't go to college? So I'm in my early 20s and thought anybody believed in God didn't go to college, is what I was thinking in my early 20s. So I had a science block, 8 years of college. So Chuck Colson showed up my second week in prison. He read about me in the Washington Post. He went to Brown. I went to Cornell. Chuck went to prison during the Watergate scandal, the whole President Nixon scandal. President Nixon would have went to prison, but he was pardoned by President Ford. And so Chuck Colson showed up my second week. I didn't even know who it was. The Watergate happened when I was in high school. And Chuck said, "Mark, this is going to be the beginning of your life. It's my second week in prison." I said, "Someone else has been telling me that for 7 months," and introduced me to God and introduced me to Jesus. He said, "Mark, have you given your life to Jesus yet?" Chuck said. And I said, "No." I said, "I've got 8 years of college telling me God does not exist, especially in the sciences. All I learned was evolution and Big Bang Theory." And I said, "No, I don't believe yet, but I want to." And he said, "Mark, do you think a PhD scientist believes in God? You think there's any?" And I said, "No, I don't think there's a PhD scientist that exists that believes in God." And he started, Chuck Colson, pouring into my life, article after article and book after book. First article he showed me, Albert Einstein said only God could create the universe and only God could create man. I'm thinking, well, Albert Einstein's a pretty smart guy. And I said, they never shared that with me at the university. Then he started sharing me books by Sir Isaac Newton that wrote as much about Jesus as he did about science. I said, boy, they sure never shared that with me at the university. And then he shared a book that changed my life forever. He shared a book with me in June of 1998, 24 years ago. It was a book by a scientist named Don Byerly, B-I-E-R-L-E, in Minnesota, still alive today. And this scientist for 10 years was trying to prove to all his friends that God does not exist. He was an atheist. But the more he studied it, the more he researched it, he became obsessed with it. He wrote a book called Surprised by Faith. This atheist wrote a book, Surprised by Faith, that God exists and Jesus is the Son of God. And I finished that book, who was a critic, who became a Christian. a Christian biologist, Don Byerle, Bierle. The book's titled Surprised by Faith. I finished that book that Chuck Colson gave me and got down on my knees that day and gave my life to Jesus. My 3rd month in prison. That Jesus does exist, that he died on a cross for my sins. I'm a PhD scientist from an Ivy League university, and I have zero doubt God exists and Jesus is the Son of God. And I have zero doubt in my mind about that. And when I finished that book, 200 pages of evidence, I remember thinking, how can you be a PhD scientist and not believe in God? That's how it changed my life. And then I thought, well, I got 8 years of prison yet to do. Where am I going to find my purpose in my life? And I started taking these other guys, discipling them, inmates, and introduced them to Jesus and helped some of them get their GEDs. Some of the ones that spoke Spanish learn how to read and learn how to write. They became the most productive years of my life at $20 a month. After earning $3 million a year for 8 years, I was $20 a month for 8 years, and they became the most productive years of my life because the first time in my life, I helped somebody else besides myself.
And it's true, it took something going to prison really to transform Mark from being a selfish leader to a servant leader. And I am so thankful to Ian Howes and CBMC and Chuck Colson for pouring into Mark, and I encourage people to continually pour into young people, pour into anyone, because there are so many people out there hurting. But Mark was totally transformed. If you had known Mark in the ADM days, you wouldn't like him. He would not be the person you wanted to hang out with. But God just completely took him and transformed him and said, I have a purpose for your life. You will not be using it like you were with ADM. I didn't gift you with this intelligence for you to just squander it. I want you to use it for my glory. And God has been so good. The road that Mark has been on from CBMC and now with Coca-Cola Consolidated as part of T-Factor, Transformation Factor, could not be any more the perfect place for Mark to share his story, to help others on that path. And I thank God every day that Ian Howes saw the information about Mark in the paper and stepped out and knocked on our door, because I had been praying for Mark for so many years. And when Ian came and knocked on the door and wants to talk to Mark, I just was like, thank you, Lord, for sending somebody. I have been waiting and waiting for somebody to come to speak into him, because I had been trying, but as many of you know, it's hard to speak into your loved ones. Sometimes it's easier if it's someone else out there that comes and pours into them. So I'm grateful to those men and organizations, but I'm thankful that God has brought us through all that chaos and storm to a wonderful place.
And Ginger was on CBS News when the movie came out in 2009. The FBI was so upset with the movie, they did a documentary to combat the movie. It was an atheist, the director of the movie, and he left God out of it, left the last 30 years of our life out of it, ended with everybody going to prison. And the FBI was so upset with the accuracy, they did a documentary to combat the movie, and that's on my website, markwhitacre.com. The 3 real FBI agents, and Ginger and I, all the real people involved on this Discovery Channel documentary called Undercover. And like I said, that's on markwhitacre.com. But Ginger was on CBS News when the movie came out, and I was in California on some meetings in the biotech industry. I was COO of a biotech company when I got out almost 20 years ago. And she was in this interview, and they asked her on CBS News, they said, Ginger, how'd you do it? And she said, well, murder was an option, but divorce wasn't. God told me to stay, and I had to love God more than I loved Mark. And they said, well, when was the time that was the most confusing? She said, when Mark took a 6-month plea agreement and ripped it up and threw it in the trash can and said it was all her fault. She said murder was definitely on the table. And then they said, well, what would have happened if Mark would have signed that 6-month plea agreement? And Ginger said, she paused, and she said, you know what? I thank God he didn't sign it looking back those decades. I think Mark would have came out the same greedy man he went in and not even listened to a Chuck Colson or an Ian Howes if he had a 6-month Martha Stewart sentence. He would have came out the same man he went in. And I thank God that God gave him exactly what he needed. I would have loved to have been on that interview and said 2 years would have been enough. But I do agree that I know 6 months would not have been enough. I would have never listened to Chuck Colson with a 6-month sentence. I had to be broken. I had to get all those worldly distractions. And I'd like to end here with prayer. Ginger and I would. I'd like to pray the prayer that I prayed, especially with everything going on with the storms, and just so appreciative of being here with all of you this week. And just like to end the prayer that I prayed in June 4th of 1998 at age 40. I'm 65 now, when I accepted Jesus in my life for the first time in my life, after I made a train wreck of my life. And he took our life from ashes to beauty. As I said, 43 years married, miracle of God. Divorce rate, if you serve 5 years and longer in prison, is 99% divorce rate. If you serve 5 years and longer, we had less than a 1% chance that our marriage survived, but it shows God doesn't care about statistics. Miracle of God that we've survived this, and I thank God for Ginger every day. When I wake up, I say, thank God that he gave me Ginger. That Ginger and my kids still love me today is a miracle. After everything I put them through, you couldn't have done more mistakes. I mean, everything you could do wrong, I was making the wrong decisions. I was spiraling out of control. And only God could put this life back on track. And it's been wonderful the last 25 years of being a servant for Jesus Christ and being an ambassador for him. And I'd like to pray the prayer I prayed on June 4th, 1998. And if you'd like to invite Jesus into your life for the first time, feel free to pray in silence. If you'd like to renew and re-energize your relationship, just feel free to pray in silence along with me. But let's pray. Father, I am a sinner. Father, I've made some horrific mistakes in my life. I've made a train wreck in my life, Father. And Father, I pray that you will guide my steps and give me wisdom way beyond my years to keep me on your track and to keep me off my track. Father, I know you sacrificed your son Jesus for my sins, and that your son died a horrific death for my sins, Father. And I know I will have eternal life in heaven, Father, by believing in your son Jesus as the Son of God. And Father, I pray for everybody in this room that you keep them safe and healthy, and with the storm and their travels, Father, protect them. And I pray, Father, the ones that don't yet have you in their heart, that they will get to know you and will accept you, and that you will become their Lord and Savior, Father. And I pray the ones that know you, Father, I pray that they leave here, this FCCI conference, which has been wonderful, and that they have more passion than they have in their life to serve you and to be a servant leader, Father, to be an ambassador for you here on earth until we join you in heaven. And I pray all of this, Father, in Jesus' strong name. Amen. God bless all of you. Thank you very much for having us.